Hi guys, Amaris here. Check this out. This is an ASRock motherboard with an Intel i8-65 chipset released way back in 2003. And believe it or not, that's Windows 11 running on it with full working AGP 8X support. So yes, today we're bringing AGP support back to Windows 10 and 11, although Windows 11 never had any to begin with. But why on earth would you even want that? Well, imagine building the ultimate retro multi-boot machine, a PC that plays nice with DOS, but also has official support for Windows 98 and XP. But what if you also want to jump into Windows 11, maybe just to go online for a moment or grab a file? Well, some late era AGP motherboards can actually handle Windows 10 and even Windows 11. Despite the official requirements, Windows 11 up to version 23H2 can technically run on 64-bit SSE 3 CPUs without any kernel modifications. We just need to bypass the initial hardware checks, which only takes 2 clicks if you prepare the installation ISO with Rufus. That's why you're looking at Windows 11 running on a Celeron D347 right now. And yes, it's a single-core CPU from 2006, and it's not enough for Windows 11, but I wouldn't call it painfully slow either. Anyway, with this ASRock 865p board, things get way better because it supports quad-core CPUs like this Q6600 I just installed. And this thing can actually handle Windows 11 just fine. In fact, its multi-core performance is better than the Celeron N4020 found in low-end Windows 11 laptops. But of course, without proper graphics drivers, Windows 11 will still feel sluggish no matter what CPU we're using. And that means we have to teach Windows 11 how to deal with an AGP slot. Now, I'm sure you know what AGP is. It stands for Accelerated Graphics Port, and it was the main interface GPUs used from late 1997 until around 2004 when PCI Express took over. There was also a transition period where some GPUs were released in both formats, PCIe and AGP. And the best part is that those chips also got 64-bit drivers with official support up to Windows 8. And that's exactly the kind of drivers we're looking for when it comes to Windows 11, which, again, despite its strict official requirements, it's still backward compatible with the display driver model used in Windows 7. The last GPUs released in AGP format were the Radeon HD 4600 series. The AGP versions came out in 2009, and it just so happens that I have one right here. It's a Radeon HD 4650 with 1 GB of DDR2 memory. Definitely not the fastest AGP card, but the RV730 chip inside is the most advanced one available for AGP. So let's see how we can get it installed. But first, let's look at what exactly happened to AGP support in modern Windows. Well, the original release of Windows 10 version 15.07 and its first major update 15.11 still included native out-of-the-box AGP bus support. But after that, Microsoft quietly stripped those core subsystem files from the operating system. And today, if you install an AGP card, especially an AGP 8X model, Windows will most likely throw a code 43 error and the drivers will refuse to initialize. Before we fix that, we need to understand how the hardware behaves. By default, an AGP port presents itself to the operating system as a standard PCI to PCI bridge. That's enough for the system to post, display video, and boot. In fact, many AGP cards can operate purely in standard PCI mode if the display driver allows it. Some cards can do this in their native AGP slot or even in a literal PCI slot using a PCI to AGP adapter like I've shown you guys in a previous video. But if you want to go beyond standard PCI performance and unlock what AGP was really designed for, we need to install a dedicated driver for that bridge. This is called a GART driver, short for Graphics Address Remapping Table. And this is where things get tricky. The GART driver is highly chipset dependent, so an Intel motherboard like this one needs an Intel GART driver, while motherboards using VIA or AMD chipsets need their own. That's how I came across a zip file with both 32-bit and 64-bit Windows 10 AGP drivers. There was also a custom INF file needed to install them, but after taking a look inside, I realized these AGP drivers were meant for AMD K8 and K9 chipsets only. Still, it was a good starting point. The Intel driver I needed for this Intel 865p motherboard is called AGP 440sys, and it basically works with all Intel AGP chipsets. I had to grab it from the Windows 10 1507 release. Then I modified the INF file so AGP 440sys would get matched with the correct PCI to PCI bridge. Of course, I'll share all the files in the description, so check the links down below. Now, to load the AGP driver, we need to find the exact PCI to PCI bridge linked to the AGP slot. It has a specific hardware ID, which we can find inside the INF file, so it's pretty easy to spot. Once we know which PCI to PCI bridge needs updating, we just click Update Driver and point Windows to the custom INF file. And that's it. Actually, the last step is to add the generic AGP registry entries by running the AGP reg file. Next, it comes down to the graphics drivers. In my case, they were already installed, but the card was showing a code 43 error. Then, guess what? The moment AGP 440sys loaded, my Radeon HD 4650 came to life in full HD. As I mentioned earlier, 64-bit Windows 7 display drivers can technically be installed on Windows 11, but results aren't guaranteed since, well, they were designed for Windows 7. For this Radeon HD 4650, I used the last Catalyst drivers with AGP support released in 2012. And I can't really complain, everything works fine, and most importantly, there are no UI glitches, which can actually happen in Windows 11 when we are using older video drivers. Now, when it comes to benchmarking, the 3D Mark 2001 score came pretty close to what I got on Windows 10, back when it had official built-in AGP support. But it's not as good as in Windows 7, where this card scored 22k points. Besides benchmarking, we can play games, of course. This is a DirectX 10.1 card, though the DDR2 memory really doesn't help with newer titles. For DirectX 10 games, we'd probably want something like an HD 3870 with DDR4, which is an amazing card for AGP. Now, one of the reasons this Radeon 4650 is called HD is that it comes with H.264 hardware decoding. And this was a big deal back then, especially on AGP systems. The good news is we can still use that hardware decoding even in Windows 11, but we need to pick the right player, something like a Media Player Classic Home Cinema, which comes bundled with the K-Lite codec pack. And it gets even better if we use the right browser, and in this case we're talking about Firefox. We get hardware acceleration via OpenGL. That is definitely not the case with Chromium-based browsers, which just fall back to slow software rendering, very slow. Now, even with the hardware acceleration we get in Firefox, there are still only 3 gigs of RAM available, so we can't have like 40 tabs open like we usually do. Anyway, except for some slowdowns here and there when this swap file starts doing its thing like it's 1997, I would say that Windows 11 runs way better than anyone would have expected on this DDR1 motherboard. And speaking of 1997, I almost forgot, even the ancient AC97 Onboard audio codec with an ALC850 chip could be installed on Windows 11. The onboard Realtek LAN also worked right out of the box. But for pretty much everything else, we have to turn off driver signature enforcement to get older drivers installed. Speaking of which, you might want to check out this video where I install a Voodoo 2 in Windows 11 using some experimental Windows XP 64-bit drivers. But a Voodoo 2 is a multimedia device, more like a TV turner, as far as Windows 11 is concerned. So technically it has better chances to work than running an unsupported GPU with Windows 7 drivers through an unsupported AGP bus. By the way, Windows 23H2 version is still receiving security updates, though only for the Education and Enterprise editions. Since the 24H2 release, Microsoft requires CPUs with SSE 4.2 instructions, and since no such CPUs exist for AGP motherboards, it looks like Windows 11 23H2 is officially the end of the road for configurations like this. Alright, you can find all the files used in this video and more on my Patreon page. It's completely free to join, read and download everything. Thanks for watching. Omar is out.